Hello and welcome to the webinar, PR Highlights from Cannes Lion 2017. Apologies for the slight delay in starting today's webinar. My name is Philip Smith, I'm the Head of News and Content at Gorkana, and I'm delighted to be your host over the next 50 minutes or so. As those of you who are joining us live well know, we're running and recording this webinar in June, the week after the annual Cannes Lion International Festival of Creativity, and of course the Cannes Lion Awards. The event is a fixture in the marketing calendar, and in this webinar we're going to take a look at how PR is growing its presence at the festival and identify highlights from this year and pick out some of the trends and ideas that will shape the industry over the next 12 months. The festival, which has traditionally been known as an advertising event, has widened its remit to encompass more and more marketing disciplines over the last few years. In 2009, it introduced the PR Lions as a category of awards, and this year, PR agencies could be credited for their work in all categories. As the PRTA's Francis Ingham has noted, PR agencies walked away with more Lions than ever before this year. But the question we want to look at today is how does PR fit into the whole idea of the festival, its awards, and what the value of the event is to PRs and communicators. To help us do that, we have two PR experts who are going to present their different takes on Cannes in a minute, and then join us for a Q&A about the festival, PR, and anything else you want to ask them. They're both fresh from Cannes, which, as I say, actually might not be the right expression to use, but I'm delighted to say we're joined on the webinar by Ben Titchmarsh, who's Head of Media and Marketing at Propeller Group, which has been working with the festival on this year's event, and Mark Perkins, Creative Director at MHP Engine, which won a gold and 2 bronze 2016 Lions for its work on the NHS Blood and Transplant Services Missing Type campaign. Ben, Mark, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you.
Good to be here. In a minute, Ben and Mark are going to share their highlights from Cannes this year and give us a couple of 10-minute or so presentations. Ben's going to give us some insight into what it's like to take part in the event and be part of the organisation of the event. Mark is going to share some of his experiences and also the power and joy, I guess, of winning the awards. With all that, we're going to then hear from you and your questions, so please do send in your questions using the panel on the right-hand side of your screens and help me put Ben and Mark on the spot. They're going to take about 20 minutes overall with their presentations. We're going to make sure then we have at least 10-15 minutes for questions, so do take the chance to send them in to us. I think that's more than enough for me at this stage. We're going to hear from Ben first. So Ben, shall we start the presentation?
Philip, thanks for the introduction. Sorry we couldn't bring the weather of the French Riviera or the rosé back to dreary London, but we'll certainly share some thoughts on Cannes Lions. Thanks for the introduction. As you said, my name's Ben Titchmarsh. I'm Head of Media and Marketing at Propeller Group, and I think we have an interesting perspective on Cannes Lions for the reason that we're a B2B firm specialising in media, advertising, and digital marketing. So we see it from a client perspective and we see it from a PR perspective. I've attended Cannes Lions for the last 6 years, and this year we've been asked by the festival to assist with promotion of their entertainment, innovation and diversity initiatives during the festival. I think the festival can also be best understood for somebody who's never heard of it and is listening here for the first time as the Oscars of marketing in all its forms. It's a fantastic spectacle to behold. So without further ado, I'm going to go into quickly some details of the festival. Founded in the 50s, now in its 46th year, 15,000 people from all over the world, 100 countries attend. There's 24 Lions, which is the award, which are given out each year in a very glitzy award ceremony. PR is one of 24 categories. There were 40,000 award entries last year, which equates to, I've been told when on exhibit, 5 Olympic swimming pools. I have no idea quite whether that's depth, length. It's a great stat, though. There's also amazing cabanas, beach areas, talks and exhibitions from people outside of the main Palais building, from some of the world's biggest companies. There's also speeches and events from some of the biggest names in marketing, music, politics and showbiz, and I'm sure Mark and I will swap a few war stories of meeting people after that. There's also been great strides with the festival. The 2017 jury was made up of 43.5% women, up from 20% in 2013. So the way in which Cannes Lions evolves with the global marketing industry, I think, will be a major talking point, and they're making real strides. Before we get into the work that we loved and just launch a debate, I just want to reflect on what the working week looked like for us. Alongside representing other clients, we also helped the internal comms team with the press conferences and with other media engagements. And I would take my hat off to them. It was a masterclass in logistics. There were, I believe, 600 or 700 journalists from around the world attending. This is an image of the morning press conferences where the work is unveiled under embargo. I also think that being in that world, it's impossible not for trends that they were seeing in the wider sector not to rub off on you. And the convergence of marketing between earned media, owned media, and bought media is something that I find fascinating. It will be really interesting to see what the coming decades hold for PR. I'm just also going to show a personal perspective here. If you're wondering who I am on this webinar, I'm the sunburnt one on the far right, or the person two in from the right on the group photo. And actually, I find Cannes Lions brilliant for broadening your horizons. It really shows you where PR sits within the wider sort of marketing trends. And I think the connections that you forge out there with some really fascinating people will last a career. It's great for team bonding, but also with bonding with the industry. There's nothing like 30-odd degree heat to actually make everybody be on a level. And the value of Cannes Lions has been much debated. I would just like to say that from a personal perspective, we've been going for years. We keep our budget down. We book our Airbnb and EasyJet well in advance. We don't dine out at the Carlton every day. If anybody wanted a free lunch every day, there was somewhere that Samsung were holding where it was the most delicious salads you've ever seen. And I would actually put a question: what is the cost of actual career development, of seeing an idea that's one that actually validates something that was on the tip of your own tongue for a client? I think there's huge value in that. And also, what value is there in terms of winning something which, as Mark will tell you in a second, that actually transforms conversation in an entire sector? What does a dollar cost? So just quickly, we're now going to go into the marketing mix. I just want to reflect on this before we get into the work that we loved from the festival. My personal feeling is that PR skills have never been more coveted in wider comms, but it's really important that PR people realize their value and swim upstream, that they get a seat at the high table within marketing and business conversations and aren't almost the people at the end of an idea. We need to be there at the start. Anybody who subscribes to Gorkana, and I have done for years, will know that the number of journalists out there is all too sadly diminishing. But PR skills around owning a conversation are really, really important. I'd also say I've given up wondering whether some of the things that win at Cannes Lions are a great PR idea. I've just decided they're a great idea, and that sometimes they originate from PR companies, sometimes they originate from ad agencies with a PR mindset. And I think cross-disciplinary mindset is what will really, the future belongs to people who don't think in silos. I also love mocking ad men who take themselves very seriously and consider themselves authentic storytellers. I mean, look, we are the authentic storytellers. We are PR people. We sell stories every day. Let's seize the mantle. I'm now just going to go into a few highlights of the stuff I love, and I'm sure Mark will allude to this in terms of what he says, and people sending in their questions will. But I just love the idea there's a unifying strand behind everything. Whether you loved it, whether you loathed it, whatever your opinion on the work that I saw, you couldn't stop talking about it. That was the thing that unified it for me. And actually, if you have a great idea with great talkability, it's silly to think that the social media and PR look after themselves. But actually, that almost felt like it was the case to the greatest ideas I saw. I know you're going to talk about Google Sheet View and Like My Addiction, Graham and Fearless Girl, so I'll leave you to talk far more eloquently about them than me. But I'm just going to go into a few that I just felt really stood out, and I'm going to rattle through these quickly as there will be a debate for later. Okay, so Refugee Nation won a Gold Lion. it was an Amnesty International campaign done in conjunction with Ogilvy, New York. I just love the description of it. For the first time ever, a refugee team was going to compete at the Rio Olympics. There were 10 athletes with no national flag, no national team, no anthem to call them their own, so we gave them a flag. And as you can see from this image, the flag is the central premise of this campaign. It was inspired by the life jackets that people fleeing unimaginable horrors had on them as they emerged into wherever they were coming to. And actually, I just find it such a powerful idea. You can see it generated 2 billion impressions, but I think that its place in history is assured. And isn't that a powerful idea for an amazing brand like Amnesty International? Teddy Gun is also just genius idea. This is from the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence by FCB Inferno and Current Marketing with a PR firm who promoted it. Apparently in the US, there is more legislation around the manufacturing of teddy bears than there is around the manufacture of guns. This is a farcical situation that shames the United States of America, and it took a genius PR idea like this to bring it home. I just think this is great. It won gold. But it weren't all serious stuff. I think that's worth saying. I like this. I'll leave you guys to think about this for a second.
That's certainly eye-catching.
Yeah, so this was only shortlisted, but it captured my imagination. It's Testicular Cancer New Zealand and SCB New Zealand. The whole idea was that among millennials, you could basically encourage them to, millennial men, you could encourage them to check themselves out by literally getting them to draw a penis with the sat-nav on their mobile phones. We joke that the working title for this might be Draw a Cock Round Your Block. But whatever, we thought this was a really, really fun one. Moving on as well to a more serious campaign. This is Peru's biggest singer-songwriter. And he was invited, without the general public known, to write a song based on a love poem. It was a love letter written by somebody to their wife, asking them to take them back. And it was incredibly lyrical and incredibly moving. It shot up the charts in Peru. But what people didn't know until the big reveal as the song was actually in the charts was that it wasn't a song written by the singer-songwriter from Peru. It was actually a letter from somebody with a series and history of domestic violence to his wife, pleading for her to come back. The woman did return to her partner, and a fortnight later she was dead. Now, I just feel that's such a powerful idea. It translated into earned media coverage. It dominated the airwaves. It started a discussion. Amazing idea. And just to round up on one, which again, I just felt there is still a place for a classic PR stunt in today's multifaceted PR world. I think this deserves an award. In fact, I think it was only shortlisted, but this deserves an award purely for the picture of the man in the adult-sized baby stroller. This company knew they had baby strollers that were slightly more expensive than everybody else's, but you can't express that to an adult unless you make a ginormous version of it and you get people to sit in it and be carted around. I just loved it as an idea. They had me at the image. You can see all the earned media it generated around the world. That's just a genius idea.
I would gladly take that to work.
You would gladly, yeah, I would ride around in that thing, but preferably on day 5 of Cannes Lions when you've got slightly sunburned.
You may need it.
So look, those are my closing thoughts on things. I'm going to pass over in a second. I'm just going to leave people with some last closing thoughts. A lot of people did a lot of press conferences during Cannes Lions, and I sat in a lot of them. But WPP's Sir Martin Sol is not only a great builder of the world's largest marketing group, WPP, he's also a master communicator. The way in which he owned the conversation was formidable to see around several topics. I'd also say that no Cannes Lions presentation would be complete without a little bit of hobnobbing with celebrities. So I'll go from left to right. Wyclef Jean is delighted to have met me. You can tell from his picture. Stephen Gerrard is an absolute hero of mine, and that was the best 5 minutes of my life. and meeting the Reverend Jesse Jackson, somebody I studied at history who is genuinely a figure, a contemporary of Martin Luther King and Muhammad Ali, and to have a discussion with him was a rare delight. So I'm going to pass over to you guys now, but I'd just say for more information, to exchange battle stories and have a glass of rosé and discuss it more, there are my contact details.
Great, thank you, Ben. Mark is going to take us on his own personal CAN journey in a second. I just want to say that do remember to send in your questions for Ben and Mark. Use the panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll come back to you at the end of Mark's presentation. Mark, I shall hand over to you.
Thank you, and hello. There are a number of themes I was asked to consider for this presentation. As usual, I've done far too big a deck. So it's going to be a whistle-stop tour, and I will happily expand upon them in questions. I was asked about my first CAN. Well, actually, my first CAN was way back in 2016. It was last year. And it's more than sun, sea, and rosé. There was a lot more than I expected going on at CAN, but it was not without its pitfalls. So here's a little bit of advice for the intrepid traveller who may be planning to go to next year. First of all, be prepared, as there's a lot to take in. You'll get everything from celebrity A-list Hollywood speakers, politicians, business leaders like Martin Sorrell. There's events to experience. There's the awards to look at and to attend. And plenty going on along the beach, lots of fringe events. You need to plan, otherwise it can be very overwhelming. The other piece of advice I give is to be prepared on advance, flights, hotel, and to make sure your itinerary is sorted as well. Hotel is very important to book in advance, otherwise you might end up staying somewhere like here. This is my hotel. As you can see from the map, that isn't actually in Cannes. Not only does it look like a Mossad interrogation room, it was about 10 kilometers away, which if you make it into Cannes eventually and then discover you've left your identity card at home to get into the convention centre, it's a bit of a bind. So the importance of planning early. Also, PR Week did an article just for this year's CAN asking experts about the advice they give to first-timers. And there's one here from someone at Freud. Don't Instagram a picture of yourself drinking rosé on the Carlton Terrace, however impressed you are by the size of the bottle of wine, because people at work may see it and realise that you aren't actually attending something important. And this is me. I'm the one in the centre holding the giant bottle of rosé, pointing at it at the Hotel Carlton on an Instagram, which was seen by my finance director when I had to explain some of my expenses. So be prepared. It will come back and bite you on the backside. So on to the important stuff, PR and creativity. It was noticeably different this year at Cannes how big data has become. There were lots of urgent, preppy Americans talking, walking up and down the Crozet, wanting to engage with you and talk about the size of their measurement tool. That's when you make your excuses and leave, because there's so much going on about creativity. And that's really why I was there. And so I want to go straight onto my personal favourite campaigns. There were many I could talk about, but I've only been able to pick a handful. The first is Like My Addiction. The woman you see in the picture is Louise Delage. She had a massive Instagram following that built up as she was sending exotic pictures of herself around the world on yachts, beaches, parties. There was one thing that was noticeable in every picture, but it wasn't noticeable until it was pointed out at the reveal. In every single picture, she's holding a glass of wine. This was to highlight how addiction is an unseen habit. It was a really powerful campaign that, on the reveal, made national news, having already garnered a big following on social media, and it actually had zero media investment. This is actually my favourite campaign out of all of Cannes, just because of the cleverness of its simplicity. It's called Lit Baits, and actually it was using the irritation thing that we see on the sidebars when we go onto the likes of Mail Online and lots of websites, enticing us into clickbait and read some meaningless article. This was for National Reader Book Day, and it was by a bookshop in Dallas called Wild Detectives. And if you read You'll Never Believe the Kansas Teen, what happened to the Kansas team when our home was ruined by a tornado, or if you clicked on the teenage girl who who tricked her boyfriend into killing herself, for example, click on that and you would be led to Romeo and Juliet and the full novel. Now, who's the most expensive or paid sportsman in the world thanks to the sports sponsorship contract? It's not LeBron James, it's not Lionel Messi or Michael Jordan or Cristiano Ronaldo. It's a guy called Clay Chapman, and this is a really neat stunt. that didn't have a social purpose by a male grooming brand called Archer in the States. Clay Chapman is a minor league baseball pitcher, a bit like our equivalent of a non-league footballer, and he signed a deal with Archer worth $3.4 billion. There was just one catch to that. It's going to be paid over the next 10 million years. So Clay, in fact, gets $340 a year. And this was just a really smart challenger brand campaign that subverted all the big blockbuster sports contracts and was really about a little brand for the little guy, the everyday guy. On a different front, Reality Christmas was done as a campaign by McCann in London for Doctors of the World. And they had juxtaposed biblical scenes that we see on Christmas cards with real-life images taken by the Press Association in war-torn areas of the Middle East in the past 12 months. It's completely at odds with Christmas and what we imagine for the humanitarian crisis that we see today, or we often don't see today. It's powerful when you put the two different images together. Another great idea was Two Guys Go to the Cinema. It was to highlight the fact that new law in Spain meant that a Spanish film industry that's already struggling was crippled by the fact that it now faced a 21% tax on cinema tickets. It's only 12% to go to the theatre. So they had a very clever ploy to raise awareness of this issue and the fact that cinemas are losing money and closing down. They simply produced a play called Two Men Go to the Cinema. It was 4 lines of dialogue long, and it was performed at a live cinema screening. So it was officially a theatrical performance, and the audience only had to pay 12%. But on to the big winners. It was kind of reassuring that for the last few years at Cannes, everything has been about VR, AI, mixed reality, and now programmatic data. And in fact, the 2 most talked about campaigns at Cannes were both sculpture, an art form almost as old as humankind itself. On the left is the Grand Prix winner, Fearless Girl, which is done by Straight Street as part of their diversity initiative in their own bank, but also wider in Wall Street, which was launched on International Women's Day. A hugely powerful campaign, really impressed the judges. It was always going to win, frankly, because diversity is such a big issue at Cannes. It did give it a shoe-in between the two. The other is Meet Graham, which was done by the Transport Accident Commission in Victoria, Australia. And this shows a sculpture which was made by a sculptor, but also by a trauma specialist, providing details to show the exact kind of form the human body is required to survive a high-impact crash. If I have to stick my neck out, Meet Graham was my personal pick. Another highlight is the PR judges Q&A, because you see the shortlist, you see the awards announced, but then you go to the Q&A and you get a chance to hear the judges explain why. Now, the previous year, there have been some outlandish decisions, and as you can see the judges lined up there, it had been more like a shooting gallery. In fact, one person who's a CEO of a global agency stood up and shouted, "I thought I knew what PR was until last night." Blood may not have been spilt, but rosé almost certainly was, as lots of beers put out of place. This year, the tone was a lot more different. I think most of all, the judges, by and large, got it right. I think one judge did comment that PR has been at Cannes for 8 years, and it's adapting to what Cannes is. Some of us take a different view. I think Cannes is gradually adapting to what PR is, and that's been reflected in some of the changes in the judging procedure over the last year. I was also asked to say, what's it like to win a lion? Well, it's very nice for a start. And how do you win a lion? Well, the campaign itself is only half the work. It's about how you sell the work to the judges and the considerations that it's international. We were shortlisted for a campaign that did back in 2014 called Christmas Dinner. It was Christmas Dinner and Tin. It was for laughs. It was a big viral sensation, made lots of news. It had absolutely no social purpose. Missing Type, however, resulted in 30,000 new blood donors. So it always, I think, had more of a chance because we could demonstrate a meaningful outcome to it, apart from making lots of people laugh, which Missing Type was not intended to do, whereas Christmas Dinner was. The benefits of winning a lion are manifest in a number of ways. It gives the team behind it, but the agency you work for, huge fame and recognition. You get lots of write-ups in industry press on the day, in the weeks following, but also in the months afterwards. It also sets you up for big awards throughout the year. It's a big new business driver. Clients want to work with teams and organisations that have proven themselves able to win an award. Internally, it's a big morale boost. but it sets an ambition. You don't want to sit on your laurels. If you can do something great once, you want to repeat it again and even see if you can better it. But finally, if you have a guideline, it really does look fabulous on your reception, or in some cases, the CEO might like to put it on their desk and polish it. So very quickly, because I'm conscious of time, my 5 personal highlights. There's so much going on, and I must admit I didn't get to go to a yacht. I didn't meet Wycliffe Jean. I didn't actually meet anyone famous, and no one famous came towards me. Everyone has a very different experience of Cannes. So here's my 5 key highlights. First is always about the work. When you go to Cannes, you go to the exhibition conference centre, and you go to the basement, and all the work is on display, and it's Aladdin's cave of inspiration. It's overwhelming, and there's so much work that you can see that you wouldn't have had a chance to see before. Campaigns from Guatemala, Peru, South Africa that really had a profound effect there. And as a creative director, you're always looking for tricks and techniques and new trends that you can possibly adapt to problems you're trying to solve there. And in fact, I saw a campaign last year, which was an AI campaign called The Next Rembrandt, and applied that to a campaign that we did very successfully for the launch of Baby Dove some months later, using the same AI techniques. Second was a talk by the President of Colombia. It's not every day that you can stroll out and sit down and get an hour with the President of Colombia. And in fact, he'd just dashed for a meeting with Emmanuel Macron. But it was a very interesting talk, and he talked about the peace process and how tips and techniques and creative techniques they've used to communicate that around the world. And interesting enough, just as I talked about how you look at other campaigns for inspiration, he was talking about how he looked at previous peace processes around the world, such as the Middle East and Northern Ireland and South Africa, what worked and what didn't. You use the same techniques when you're coming up with problem solving as a creative. Then there's the kind of jingoistic flying the flag. It was really encouraging, A, to see PR industries doing much better this year at Cannes, but even more so that British campaigns are doing really well. I really love the Brutal Cup campaign by Weber Shandwick. It deservedly won silver, and I think it will win many more awards. But also Giacomo Tilly at the Romans won silver in the Young Lions. I saw the presentation they did the day before the judging, and it was phenomenal. It's available to see online if you Google it. It was all about how to raise awareness of the economic problems Chad faced, and they had a brilliant solution, which was getting Chad to host a World Cup bid. And then there's catching up with industry peers. It's a really good informal chance to meet people you know and like in the industry, or meet people you haven't even met before and get acquainted with them. Talk about the event, talk about the work, talk about what was good and bad and inspirational, and actually have a good time. Now, this is Pete Stevens of Taylor Herring. He had decreed a rule that anyone that mentions missing type at our dinner had to do a forfeit of a double Pernod, and that's put Pete Stevens drinking a double Pernod. He was the only person who mentioned the blood campaign by name. And finally, ironically enough, having not been able to mention the blood campaign at that dinner, the next day we actually won another lion for Missing Type and Missing Type International. It was the Creative Effectiveness Award, and this is only applicable to campaigns that have already won a lion. And you have to demonstrate that it had longevity and sustain and legacy beyond its initial outcome. In this case of Missing Type, it was the fact that we took it beyond the UK and it became Missing Type International. So that's all from me. Hopefully there's some food for thought there for questions, but it was a great experience, and I encourage you to go and to not repeat my mistakes.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Yes, do send in your questions for Mark and Ben. I'm going to start, though, with a question to you, Ben. Mark was very clear on if we put a gun to his head and he had to pick a winner out of all the work he'd seen. He was very clear it was on Meet Graham, and that was the campaign that really stood out for him. You mentioned a lot of campaigns you liked. What was your overall favourite? What was the one thing you go away and say, you know what, 2017 was the year of that campaign?
That's very difficult, because for one thing, I thought I was only talking about specifically the PR category rather than the overall festival. Yeah. But I feel like Fearless Girl really is a campaign for the ages. I think it will redefine a lot of how people view communications, and I really felt it was a worthy winner. The sculpture of the original bull is obviously is quite angry that somebody has subverted his original idea, but that's a story for another time.
Okay. Mark, you talked about winning awards, and obviously you've won a few. Could you give us some tips in terms of how to win an award? I mean, you mentioned some of the criteria and categories, but I'm interested in whether you think there's something that particularly people might underestimate in terms of putting the entry in terms of how you write it, the clarity around it. Well, any tips you'd like to share with us?
Yes, there's one of the most important things, and I think it was a learning from when we did Christmas Dinner, which was a campaign that cost £2,000, and we spent £1,000 on the show reel. Is the importance of the show reel, and sometimes how challenging that can be, because you're competing against, as we came to realise, a lot of ad agencies whose creative team might spend months investing their time and money in doing an amazing show reel. So it's about how you tell the story of the campaign and the impact it delivered. Don't just be confident that it will sell itself. Part of it is down to luck. There are going to be themes that year, I think, that emerged. Gender and diversity has been an ongoing one, but I think you do have to demonstrate there was a benefit to the campaign that was rather more than just pound signs. So I think that's part of the nuance of Cannes.
And is that different from any other awards, say PR Week awards? Do you feel that there's a different challenge with the Cannes award?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that British agencies face is that a lot of the quirks and nuances of a localized UK campaign don't necessarily translate to a judge who might be from India or Brazil or China. And so you have to give consideration to that. And so that's why some people I talk to who do great campaigns that win PR Week awards don't necessarily enter them for Cannes, because they don't have a global feel. And a lot of these campaigns do have a global feel too.
Yeah. Okay. And Ben, what's your thoughts on that? Do you see the Lions as special or different, or do you see them as just part of the wider mix of awards?
I think that its huge value is showing that PR cannot be in isolation. It has to relate to the wider world and also to wider trends within an industry that's about communication. I know I actually loved the Missing Type campaign even before I realised I was going to be on this with you, and we debated it in our office, and it certainly set a bar for us, because for us we have a question we keep coming back to. Can we have an idea? Can we sell the idea to the client? And then can we make the idea happen? And actually, I feel like a lot of PR people, due to our skill sets and various reasons, we're still tied to what the press release looks like. And I think the big learning for us is, right, start off with the idea. Start off with the idea that somebody could see something and they would immediately tell their friends, rather than what's the press release going to look like for that? And I'm sure there's a lot of PR people thinking in more innovative ways out there listening to this webinar now, but I'm sure there's also a lot who are still tied to something which in many ways can feel like generals fighting in the last war.
Yes, I think that there's clearly something that's resonated with people who are on the webinar, because we've got some questions about the process and judging, which I'll come to you, Mark, probably within a second. But one thing I'd say is what's great when we talk about a campaign like Missing Type, of course, is it was because we're sitting here in the UK, we often saw executions of it. So I certainly remember I was working on Campaign at the time, magazine, and its masthead was missing some of the key letters because of that campaign. So that particularly resonated. So one of the questions we've had sent in, Mark, is about just comments you mentioned, but actually what that means about the process. And I think this is actually giving us a little bit of nuts and bolts of the process of entering an award and the judging as you understand it at Cannes. The question is, you must have seen judges' comments. What's the process or criteria for judging the PR awards?
Part of that is still a mystery. You don't know what goes on, but I know there was 17 hours of debate, and the campaign that you mentioned with the singer from Peru, Eduardo Chirano, I can't remember his name exactly, who did the
you got that far.
Who did the campaign Song by a Murderer. They debated that intensely, and there was actually a cultural national divide. Some judges from Europe and the States thought it was actually offensive, whereas Latin American judges really liked it and said this was a really important campaign in our country and our community. So sometimes it comes down to, like I said before, about UK campaigns, which can sometimes be very distinct. Whether a campaign has a collective sense of agreement. I think my Fearless Gold did so well is because of the diversity issue, and it was a universal image that translated. I think what will make a campaign a success is everyone gets it instantly. The less you have to debate a campaign, and you can get it in the image, the summary, and the show reel, that will make a campaign shine through. When you're doing an award entry, I always say less is more.
Yeah. And from the comments you saw when you were talking about seeing a panel and there was rosé on the floor and so on, were the judges in broad agreement? Do you think it got to a consensus point, or do you think there was still room for debate from their comments?
I can maybe interject on this, because although I wasn't one of the 12 angry men and women of the jury, I watched the press conferences every morning, and there, as you've said, there was intense debate in almost every category, except outdoor advertising, where apparently they got it done that afternoon and then went to a restaurant. But the PR jury president, Karen Van Bergen, Chief Executive Officer of Omnicom Public Relations USA, she was the chair of everything, and she had something which I thought was pertinent. She said that the general public can instantly validate company claims, principles, and values. There's now an unprecedented accountability within PR. But actually what she looked for was PR ideas which still had kind of earned at their core. She also said that engagement and conversation that was sparked was something that they were really looking for. Good, bad, ugly, indifference was the thing they seemed to rail against. And that's something PR people have been doing forever. But as I said earlier, I think we need to now really shake off the shackles of more conventional thinking and realize we have nothing to lose but our lack of awards in previous years.
Yeah. Mark, you said some very interesting things about the idea behind the campaign, what it was trying to achieve, and slightly tongue-in-cheek, I know, when you were talking about the Christmas dinner in a can, and contrasting that with a campaign that ultimately could save lives. I think this next question is sort of getting towards that, and that is, and I know you both partly answered this, but I'll come to you first, Mark, are there any other good PR campaigns, winners, shortlist examples that aren't issues, social, charity-based? So I guess part of the idea behind that question is it easier to win at Cannes if you've got a charity or a social campaign? And do you think that it just happens that you both picked on a wide range of examples, but a lot of them are very campaigning in the truest sense of the word?
Yeah, and that was the phrase that I heard a lot last year. My first visit was social purpose. So it's always about how can a brand have a social purpose, and you do wonder sometimes if they're looking for a route in. There were campaigns that were brazenly commercial that won. Burger King won massively last year with Whopper, and they won awards again this year. Wendy's got shortlisted for trolling McDonald's on Twitter. Spotify won a silver and a bronze for offering President Obama a job. And strangely enough, that's one of the nuances. UK PRs have been using that technique to get coverage for years, and you think, oh, maybe this is new to a judge in India, Brazil, or China, because that's one of the oldest tricks in the book. So yes, they do. And in fact, I think had a UK PR agency come up with that offering Obama a job idea, they probably wouldn't have mentioned it if they can, because they said, well, it's nothing new. It worked, but it's not new.
Yeah, I would just reflect on the fact that Cannes Lions cannot be separated from the business environment and the wider global comms situation. We're in a period of huge economic uncertainty, huge social turmoil. I think the stuff that has done well at Cannes Lions reflects that. I said at the start that Cannes Lions is the Oscars of marketing in all its forms. If you look at what tends to win the Oscars, I'm afraid for every light-hearted rom-com, you tend to have about 10 very earnest films, and that actually there is an innate thing to wanting to win an award that makes people go down certain mental tracks.
That's true. Do you know a comedy hasn't won an Oscar since 1977? Annie Hall. So,
oh no.
Drama, and having social import matters.
You've definitely researched for this.
Yeah, I think the other key point to that, and one of the judges mentioned it, is that there was a statistic, and it was published globally, that the public said that 85% of the public said that if brands didn't exist, it wouldn't matter to them. So I think part of what Cannes is, when we talk about marketing and what place brands have in society and the world, is showing that brands matter. So there is a little element of having fun and games for brand activity, but it is coming always back to social purpose and the idea of brands doing more and having a function rather than just selling stuff and making money.
Often as well, they gave their brand a function that wasn't immediately apparent without kind of combining them with some issue that everybody cared about. If you actually look through the entire shortlist, for every charity at its heart client, there were also loads of them where I'd need to check the details, but they have a low-income, in low-income places in the US, they were handing out, it's a shop that basically does phone cards, and they realized that a lot of those people weren't going to have access to a polling booth, so they made their phone shop into polling booths. That's them really co-opting in a very clever way an issue that was so pertinent to people.
We have 5 minutes or so left, and I want to get on to another couple of questions. We do have, I can tell you now, is awards seems to be the thing. So I'm going to take a little break from awards with this next question, and then we'll come back to it because I know there's some more questions coming through about awards, winning lions, and how to do that. This is one, though, that I think is right up your street for both of you. I'm going to start with you, Ben, though, when I ask this question. It's about creativity. You're both from agencies, so of course this is a question about in-house teams. So this question is, do you think Cannes needs to do more to influence creativity in house PRs and clients? While some clients clearly are willing to take risks and be creative, the majority still just want research or something floating down the Thames. And one thing I would say on this, Ben, before I ask the question is, you know, do you see clients at Cannes and in-house teams? A lot of the people who talk about Cannes are in agencies. And I was wondering if you had a perspective on who was there, whether you did see any in-house people at Cannes, particularly in PR. And this wider question about creativity, do you think that it can inspire creativity elsewhere?
I think there's something, some of the best PR people I work with are in-house, without a shadow of doubt. But I feel like the great value add that employing an external agency provides is having a sense of the wider market, being prepared to suggest ideas that might not be able to go off the ground, and to a degree, being a resource that you can draw upon until you decide not to and you fire them. That's the innate nature of having an internal and an external role. Also, you can look at the idea of floating something down the Thames, or you can, I know we use that phrase as well, but I feel a lot of the campaigns just had creative ideas at their absolute heart, and I think we really have to, again, go for that in the industry for all the manner of reasons we spoke about earlier.
What about you, Mark? Do you think that Cannes can inspire creativity in people and elsewhere? I mean, you've got the weasel word creative in your job title, so do you feel that Cannes itself is just really for the creative people, you know, the creative directors, or do you think actually it can inspire creativity in other people?
There's lots of young people at Cannes. That's noticeable. So I think it's cheaper to go if you're under a certain age. I think that's correct. They're much cheaper. So there are lots of young people there, and there's lots of great work by young people. And just going back to Jack and Natalie from the Romans, it was really good to see something that I actually thought would be good enough to buy and was better than a lot of stuff on the shortlist, put together by them in 2 days. So actually meeting them and seeing that work inspired me, and just being amongst other people talking about work. Sometimes you can get stuck in your own little ruts at work, and it's not just about going to Cannes, because you can look up the work that's been shortlisted, you can go to the Cannes site, you can watch the show reels, and that's a really useful tool of what great and original and innovative looks like. And it's something I always do, not just in the days and weeks after Cannes, but I'll often come back to work if I just need to give myself a jolt. Sometimes it's the most useful way, rather than just sitting staring at your own desktop.
This question I'm going to ask you both, not now but in a minute, is what's the one thing you've changed since you've come back from Cannes? So is there something that you put into your process or your thinking? Before I do that, Mark,
change my clothes.
No, I'm relieved to see that. A question about planning, and this is about awards, of course. A lot of the campaigns you talk about look like they took years in planning. For a campaign such as Missing Type, how far in advance do you start planning, And how do you convince a client into investing for long-term output? That's a simple question.
The truth about Missing Type is it was activated 5 weeks from sign-off. And sometimes it's proof, and there was an awful lot of planning that went into that, but it's proof that you don't need months and months of meetings and chin stroking and debate to make a campaign happen when you do it against the clock and you don't know what the outcome is going to be, but you believe in an idea. The best ideas in the campaigns that are most effective usually have an element of risk. If there's no risk, there's probably a smaller margin for success of what you're going to achieve. So planning is always important, essential. I believe Fearless Girl was actually 18 months. That statue wasn't made in days and just put there and it all happened overnight. It was 18 months of consideration, debate, strategy, rather than just, we've got an idea for a statue, let's make it and it'll happen. It doesn't work like that.
Did you think about winning awards when Missing Type was put into action?
No.
When do you start thinking about entering it?
After the campaign. If you're developing a campaign with an award in mind, you're probably doing the wrong thing. You're always trying to meet the objectives of your client or the problem you're trying to solve. That shouldn't occur to you when you're planning and activating a campaign. It's only afterwards, when you can kind of bask and reflect in what was achieved, that you think, okay, well actually this has a chance of doing that. But it's usually when other people start saying, you should enter that, or that's going to do well at so-and-so, because you think, oh, okay, well, they seem to know what they're talking about. Maybe it does.
Okay, I'm going to need very quick answers from both of you for the next 2 questions, and then we'll have to finish. First one is there anything that you've changed, anything that you put into practice since coming back from Cannes that's inspired you? Ben, is there?
Again, it's too early to say.
Okay.
I think it's very easy to come back from something inspired. I would love to see how I've personally tried to respond and how our agencies try to respond 12 months from now. But I think if I was to say one thing, the lead campaign was Fearless Girl, a bit of fearlessness. Go into meetings and say to clients, okay, there is the day-to-day stuff that we can do for you, and that's great. But can we earmark budget, earmark time, earmark blood, sweat and tears to actually get something real into the world and plonk it down in front of people and get them to wander around it or endlessly debate it in a pub or wherever it might be. For me, that's where PR is going, and I think we all have to embrace it.
Great. Mark, one thing you're changing?
Again, too soon to say, and that will probably become apparent over time, but it's there's so many things you take away from it that when you're looking at a brief or a client problem challenge they're giving you, something will pop into your head about something that you've seen, and that happened, as I said, with a campaign we did for Baby Dove, when we had to come up with a response to a brief. So we thought, well, actually, AI, that approach could work because it's the same approach that Next Rembrandt did. Called an AI specialist and said, can you do this? And they said yes. And so it's just about learning from what you've seen and absorbed.
And again, starting with you, Mark, any trend that you would say that's going to be big now for the next 12 months? I've seen it at Cannes first.
Data.
Data?
Data is massive. Data is the new oil. And it was so clear about how data is changing the way that advertisers and PR people are planning campaigns, in terms of what they say, how they say it, how it's going to be delivered to their audience and how their audience is going to respond. It's what people are now looking for. I don't personally use it much, but I'm sure I will do increasingly.
Great. Ben?
To reflect on that, we're not talking about a YouGov poll of 2,000 respondents that generates a nice headline about how much people eat ice cream or don't. I think using data to inform and to validate counterintuitive insights is really interesting. The thing I feel that you can look at all different strands. The biggest thing I took from it was just subversion. Our founder, Martin Lote, has a phrase, familiarity with a twist. I think that all the campaigns I loved just had that moment of instant recognition followed by a moment of, oh God, but they've done this, isn't that clever? And then that's where the shareability, the talkability, the PR comes from. It starts from a sort of moment. And integration, PR people have to sit there from the start. We can't be the delivery people at the end of a process. We have to be there, and PR has to be in the mix as the great campaigns are forged.
Brilliant. I'm afraid the worst part of my job is that I always have to cut things short, but we're bang on time. Apologies to everyone listening in for the slight delay in us starting due to a slight technical error here. But I want to thank you all for listening in and taking part, and thank you for your questions. A particular big thank you to Ben and to Mark for joining us on today's webinar. We will make the slides available, so there's lots of takeaways there, and particularly on Ben's slides, lots of stats, so you can enjoy those in your own time, and we'll have a recording of the webinar available as well. Thank you everyone for your questions and for listening in. We'll have another webinar in July on newsrooms and their value to corporate brands. We hope to see you soon. The webinar is now over.